2,800 years ago, a blind poet known as Homer would produce two epic works. But here's what makes it extraordinary. A man who had never seen the world described it better than anyone ever has. His first epic, the Iliad, shook civilization with the fall of Troy, a legendary city brought to its knees not by force, but by pure deception. But Troy was only the beginning, because once the war ended, Homer turned his gaze to one man. Not the strongest, not the bravest, but the smartest. A man whose 10-year journey home would become the most epic survival story in human history. His second epic, the Odyssey, would document every terrifying moment of it. He had done the impossible. After 10 brutal years of war, Odysseus, the architect of the legendary Trojan horse, had finally achieved victory. The greatest military trick ever conceived. And now, all he wanted was to go home. Home to the island of Ithaca. Home to his faithful wife Penelope. Home to his son, Telemachus, who had spent his entire childhood wondering if his father was even still alive. Simple enough, right? Just sail home. Except nothing would be simple about what came next. A journey so epic, its tale would be told for thousands of years. This is his story. Odysseus ruled over the Greek island of Ithaca, but had spent 10 long years fighting in Troy to retrieve the Spartan queen Helen. But with his mission now complete, Odysseus looked to travel back to his homeland, where his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus awaited. Gathering his fleet of ships on the smoldering Trojan shores, Odysseus would set sail, relieved, hopeful, ready. With Troy in ruins, they headed north first to look for supplies, landing on the shores of Ismara, home to the Ciconians, a Thracian tribe who had fought against them in Troy, a terrible neighborhood to stop for groceries. After gathering what they needed, the Ciconians unleashed their full force, overwhelming Odysseus' men and forcing a chaotic retreat back to the ships. Strike one, heading south and then north toward Ithaca, with home almost in sight. A violent storm erupted from nowhere, blowing them off course and spitting them out onto an island nobody recognized. The island of the Lotus Eaters. Lost and confused, Odysseus sent men ashore to ask for directions. The locals were friendly enough, too friendly. Instead of a map, they offered fruit. Sweet, beautiful, intoxicating lotus fruit. What nobody mentioned. Eat it, and you forget everything. Your home, your family, your own name. You just want to stay. Forever. Odysseus watched as his men began dropping to the ground, smiling blissfully as their minds dissolved. He had seconds to act, dragging his day's companions back to the ships by force. He ordered an immediate departure. No questions, no goodbyes. Some of his men didn't even want to leave. That's how powerful it was. Running dangerously low on supplies, Odysseus spotted a nearby island. Scouts reported a shepherd's camp, in a cave filled with cheese, meat, and livestock. A gold mine for a starving crew. They helped themselves, made camp, and waited for the shepherd to return. The shepherd returned all right. Except he wasn't a shepherd. He was Polyphemus, a cyclops, a one-eyed, mountain-sized son of Poseidon himself. And he sealed the cave entrance with a boulder so massive that not even 20 men could budge it. When Odysseus tried to reason with him, Polyphemus answered by grabbing 2 of his men and crushing them in his bare hands. He ate them, bones and all, then went to sleep, then came back in the morning and did it again. The crew was trapped, terrified, and being slowly eaten alive. But Odysseus? He was already thinking. He couldn't kill the Cyclops. The boulder would stay shut forever. So instead, he did something far more brilliant. He offered Polyphemus the wine he'd brought as a trade gift. The Cyclops drank, then drank more. Then, drunk and satisfied, asked Odysseus his name, wanted to give a gift in return. Odysseus smiled slowly. My name? My name is Nobody. Polyphemus laughed and passed out cold. Moving fast, Odysseus grabbed a sharpened wooden stake, heated it in the fire, and drove it straight into the Cyclops' eye. The cave erupted with an earth-shaking scream. Cyclopes from across the island came running, shouting through the sealed boulder. Polyphemus, What's wrong? Who's hurting you? And Polyphemus, blinded and raging, bellowed back. Nobody is hurting me. Nobody. Silence. Confusion. The other Cyclopes shrugged and walked away, exactly as Odysseus had planned. The next morning, Polyphemus rolled back the boulder to let his sheep out to graze, feeling every animal as it passed to make sure no human slipped through. But Odysseus had already thought of that. Each man clung to the belly of a sheep, hidden beneath the wool, passing right under the Cyclops' blind, grasping fingers. They made it back to the ships. They were free. But then Odysseus made a mistake that would haunt him for the next 10 years. Overcome with pride, drunk on his own brilliance, as they sailed away, he stood at the stern and shouted back at the island. That was Odysseus who blinded you. Odysseus of Ithaca. Remember that name? His crew begged him to stop. He didn't. Polyphemus dropped to his knees and prayed to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea, to curse Odysseus, to strip him of every single crewman, to make him wander the oceans for 10 long years before he ever saw home again. Poseidon heard his son's prayer, and he granted every word of it. Still unaware of the divine curse now following him like a shadow, Odysseus landed on the floating island of Iolia, home to King Aeolus, master of the winds. The king feasted with him for days, and upon departure handed Odysseus a parting gift unlike any other, a leather bag containing the power of every wind in existence, which, if used carefully, could carry him straight H. Home, sailing hard, Ithaca appeared on the horizon. They were almost there. Odysseus could practically smell home. He allowed himself to sleep. That was his second mistake. While he dozed, his crew, convinced the leather bag contained gold and silver Aeolus had secretly kept for himself, quietly opened it. Every wind exploded out at once. The fleet was launched backwards across the sea like a cork from a bottle, spinning helplessly until they crash-landed right back on Iolia. When they begged Aeolus for help again, he refused. He could see the curse written all over them. No wise man angers the gods. Their next stop was the harbor of Laestrygonia. Odysseus sent 3 scouts ahead to investigate. They never came back, or rather, they came back running, chased by enormous giants who devoured them alive. The Laestrygonians were bloodthirsty cannibals, and they weren't just hungry for 3 scouts. They climbed the cliffs above the harbor and rained boulders down onto the fleet below. Ship after ship exploded under the weight of stone. Men screamed and drowned. The giants waded into the water, spearing the crews like fish. Of the entire fleet that had left Troy, only 1 ship survived, Odysseus' ship. He had lost everything else. Exhausted and hollowed out by grief, the survivors arrived at the island of a home to the enchantress Circe, daughter of the sun god Helios. Beautiful, dangerous, completely unpredictable. Odysseus split his men into 2 groups. Half went to explore. They found her house deep in the woods, surrounded by lions and wolves that should have been savage, but instead sat at her feet, tame and docile, watching with strange, empty eyes. Circe welcomed the men inside, fed them well, poured them wine, then reached for her wand. When the men woke up, they were no longer men. They were pigs. One soldier who had skipped the meal witnessed everything and sprinted back to Odysseus. He immediately set off to save them, and along the way, the messenger god Hermes appeared with a gift, moly, a magical herb that would make him immune to Circe's magic. Odysseus ate it and walked calmly into the witch's house. When Circe tried her potion on him and nothing happened, she stared in pure disbelief. Before she could recover, Odysseus had drawn his sword and pressed it to her throat. Changed them back. Now, Circe, for perhaps the first time in her immortal life, obeyed. So impressed was she by this mortal who had resisted her power, she invited him to stay. And stay he did for an entire year. The two had a son together, Telegonus. But eventually, the pull of home became impossible to ignore. As Odysseus prepared to leave, Circe gave him one final piece of advice. Before going home, he had to go somewhere far darker first. He had to go to the underworld. sailing west to the very edge of the known world. Odysseus performed the ritual sacrifice and summoned the dead. The blind prophet Tiresias appeared from the shadows with a chilling warning. You will reach the island of Helios. His sacred cattle graze there. Do not touch them, not one. If your men harm those animals, every single one of them dies. Only you return home, broken and alone, on a stranger's ship. Odysseus listened carefully. He would make sure no one touched those cattle. He had to. Back at sea, a hauntingly beautiful sound began to drift across the water. Melody like nothing any human ear had ever heard. Soft, perfect, irresistible. The sirens, creatures whose song had lured countless sailors to their deaths on the rocks below. But Odysseus had a plan. He ordered every crewman to plug their ears with beeswax, thick and solid, so not a single note could reach them. But Odysseus himself? He wanted to hear it. He wanted to be the first mortal in history to hear the siren's song and survive. So he had his men tie him to the ship's mast. Tight, with strict orders, ignore him no matter what. As the ship drew close, the song hit him like a wall. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever experienced. Every nerve screamed at him to break free, to dive into the water, to go to them. He thrashed violently against the ropes. He pleaded. He commanded his crew to untie him. They couldn't hear a single word. They just rowed. Eventually, agonizingly, the music faded. They were through. Odysseus slumped against the mast, trembling and gasping. First man in history to hear the sirens and live. What he didn't know, the sirens carried a terrible fate. If any mortal ever resisted their song, they were destined to die. As his ship disappeared over the horizon, each siren took her own life. The next morning brought a choice with no good options. Circe had warned him of a narrow passage with horror on both sides. To the right, Scylla, a six-headed sea monster clinging to the cliffs, each head lined with 3 rows of razor teeth. To the left, Charybdis, a whirlpool so violent it swallowed ships whole in seconds. Choose Scylla, lose 6 men. Choose Charybdis, lose everyone. Odysseus gritted his teeth and steered right. 6 heads descended from the cliff face, each snatching a screaming sailor right off the deck. The rest of the crew watched in helpless horror. Odysseus didn't slow down. He couldn't. 6 more names he would carry to his grave forever. The island of Thrinacia, home to the sacred cattle of Helios, the exact animals Tiresias had warned him about in the underworld. Odysseus told his men clearly, firmly, desperately, those animals were untouchable, sacred, death sentences on 4 legs. Then a storm hit, and it didn't leave. For nearly a month, they were stranded. Food ran out completely. Men began to starve. Desperation crept through the crew like a fever. One night, while Odysseus slept, his crew made a decision. They killed the cattle. When Odysseus woke to the smell of roasting meat, his heart stopped. He fell to his knees in disbelief. He had warned them, begged them. They had done it anyway. The storm cleared. They set sail. For one brief, dangerous moment, it seemed like maybe they'd gotten away with it. Then the sky turned black. Helios had complained to Zeus, and Zeus was furious. A thunderbolt crashed from the heavens and split the ship clean in 2. The ocean swallowed everyone instantly, every last man, except Odysseus, who clung to the wreckage alone. 9 days and 9 nights, he drifted across the open sea. On the 10th day, the ocean delivered him to a shore. Poseidon's curse had been fulfilled. To the letter, the island belonged to Calypso, a goddess, daughter of the Titan Atlas. She pulled Odysseus from the water and nursed him back to life. She was beautiful, kind, and she fell completely in love with him. She offered him everything: paradise, eternal youth, immortality itself. All he had to do was forget Ithaca, forget Penelope, forget Telemachus. He refused. So Calypso, stung by rejection, kept him prisoner for 7 years. 7 years on a paradise island that felt like a cage. Every night, Odysseus sat on the shore, staring at the horizon toward a home he couldn't reach. weeping in silence. High on Mount Olympus, the goddess Athena, Odysseus' greatest divine ally since Troy, could no longer watch. She pleaded his case before Zeus. Zeus agreed. An order was sent to Calypso. Release him. Reluctantly, she obeyed. She helped him build a raft, packed him with supplies, and watched him sail away. A man who had chosen a mortal woman over a goddess and immortality itself. But Poseidon wasn't finished. The moment he spotted Odysseus' raft, he conjured one final, personal storm. The raft was destroyed. Odysseus barely survived, swimming desperately until he crawled, naked and broken, onto a strange shore. He collapsed and slept. The island was Scheria, home of the Phaeacians, ruled by King Alcinous and Queen Arete. The next morning, their daughter Nausicaa came to the beach with her handmaidens to wash clothes, and found a naked, shipwrecked stranger staring back at her. Her handmaiden screamed and ran. Nausicaa, guided quietly by Athena, held her ground. She gave Odysseus clothes and brought him to the palace. The king and queen welcomed him inside, fed him, and entertained him with their royal poet Demodocus. Demodocus began with songs of the gods. Then he turned to the tales of Troy. He sang of Achilles, of Agamemnon, and then of the Trojan horse, of the cunning Greek who had outwitted an entire civilization with a wooden statue. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. But one man at the table wasn't cheering. He was weeping, pulling his robe over his face. Odysseus wept silently for every friend he had watched die. The king noticed. He stopped the music. He looked directly at this mysterious stranger and asked, "Who are you, really?" Odysseus lowered his robe slowly. "My name is Odysseus, son of Laertes, of Ithaca." The room went completely silent. He spent the rest of that night telling them everything. Every monster, every storm, every loss. 20 years of suffering poured out in a single haunting evening. The next morning, a ship sat waiting in the harbor, loaded with gold and silver, a gift from the Phaeacians, with a full crew ready to take him home. He thanked them with everything he had, and set his eyes on the horizon. Ithaca, 20 years after he had left. He was finally home, but Athena was waiting on the shore, and she wasn't smiling. She warned him. The palace had been overrun. Over 100 suitors had flooded his home, eating his food, wearing his clothes, competing shamelessly for his wife. Penelope had held them off with breathtaking cunning, weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus' father, promising to choose a new husband once it was finished then, secretly unraveling her work every single night. 3 years of stalling, until someone caught her. Now she was out of time. Athena disguised Odysseus as a bent, ragged old beggar. He had to see the full damage before he struck. He went first to his most loyal servant Eumaeus, who welcomed the stranger warmly, never suspecting it was his own king. Then Telemachus arrived. Eumaeus stepped away briefly, and the moment they were alone, Athena lifted the disguise. The frail old beggar was gone. In his place stood a tall, powerful man, eyes fierce and alive. Telemachus stumbled back. "You must be a god. I'm your father," Odysseus said. They collapsed into each other, father and son, shaking with tears, 20 years of separation dissolving in a single embrace. But there was no time. Not yet. Back in disguise, Odysseus entered his own palace and watched suitors insult everything he had built. He said nothing. He watched. He planned. Then Penelope announced the contest. The man who could string Odysseus' legendary bow, a weapon these men had never seen the like of, and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axe heads in a row, would become her husband. One by one, the suitors stepped forward. One by one, they failed, unable to even string the bow, let alone fire it. The hall filled with frustrated laughter and muttered excuses. Then the old beggar shuffled forward and quietly asked for his turn. The suitors howled with laughter. The crowd roared. He sat. He picked up the bow, ran his fingers along the string with the quiet ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Then, effortlessly, he strung it. The laughter died. He notched an arrow, drew back, released. The arrow sang through all 12 axe heads. Perfect. Complete silence. Then Odysseus stood up and slowly turned the bow on the suitors. "My turn," he said. Chaos erupted. Suitors scrambled desperately for their weapons. But Telemachus had hidden every sword, every spear, every shield while the contest was underway. They had nothing. Odysseus, Telemachus, and Eumaeus fought together, outnumbered but relentless, until the very last suitor fell. When the hall finally went silent and the last body was still, Odysseus stood alone in his own home for the first time in 20 years. He called for Penelope. She came down the stairs and stopped. She stared at this man. Familiar scarred him and didn't move. She had hoped before, been tricked before. So she tested him quietly, mentioning a secret detail about their marriage bed that only the real Odysseus could ever know. He answered without a moment's hesitation. She ran to him. 20 years of waiting. 20 years of unwavering faith. 20 years of refusing to give up on a man the whole world assumed was dead. And here he stood. They held each other without a single word for a long, long time. When she finally pulled back, she looked at him. This man who had outsmarted gods and monsters and the fury of the sea itself, and asked the only question that mattered. "Where have you been?" He smiled softly. A single tear ran down his cheek. "Where do I begin?"